Thank you for watching, liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing right now.
So the other day, I was browsing the web, as I'm normally doing on my Comcast, now residential class connection. I switched from business to residential, largely because I felt I was overpaying for business. It was kind of expensive. And I stumbled across an article on Kotaku, and I believe that's how you say it.
I think so.
Something like that. I only read it, right? This blog, saying that this guy got kicked off of Comcast for using too much bandwidth, going past the arbitrary 250 gigabyte cap that Comcast imposed in 2008, if I'm not mistaken. And I read further, I'm like, this dude's in Seattle. Like, holy cow. And then I dug a little further and read a little bit more about what was going on and reached out to him.
Vrignaud. Let's just use Andre. It's going to be a lot
Andre.
Yeah.
And kind of read a little bit more about what was going on. I reached out to a few people that I knew in the local media who then reached out, and just a couple of people. I think most of them came to you largely through what you were blogging.
Yeah, so people picked it up and just started passing it around.
And not just locally, but I'd imagine internationally. Yeah. This is a big issue, not just here in the United States, where ISPs will cap your broadband, and as I kind of mentioned before, in an arbitrary fashion. I mean, there's no necessary rhyme or reason. So I thought, well, why not take some time? And we had a phone call yesterday, and it was a good phone. It was a lengthy phone call talking about this issue, a greater issue, not just related to our ISP, but really, much broader than that. And so I thought, well, why not capture Andre's story and your thoughts on camera for YouTube and the world?
Sure, good conversation.
So tell us what happened.
What happened? Well, 2.5-ish months ago, came home, well, first off, for the last 8 or 9 years, been using a cable connection through Comcast. It's always been a residential connection. They up the speed over time, and kind of keep the price point the same. So most recently it was like 15 megabits down, 3 megabits up for around $60 a month. And, went for 8 or 9 years in that class, not an issue, never had a problem. And one day I came home, probably 2.5 months ago, and roommate mentioned, hey, the internet's gone, which, you're kind of like, all right, let me go find out what happened. You go down in the basement and kick the server, look at the modem, try to figure out what's going on. Lights were blinking, but there were two blue lights blinking, and I didn't recognize. I was like, all right, well, I just bought this cable modem, hopefully it's not fried. So you do what anybody does, you unplug it, you plug it back in, you wait for it to sync, and then it stayed blinking. I'm like, all right, let's call up Comcast. So I called them up, their regular customer service line, the only line I could find. And they said, oh, we got to pass you over to our customer security group, which, strange name for a group. I'm like, okay, please do, let's go talk. And I talked to this gentleman. He basically said, oh, you've been cut off for overuse. Do you know what you were doing? I was like, whatever I normally would do, Netflix, streaming movies, we play a lot of video games, use the internet. I don't know, what was I doing? He's like, oh, we can't tell you that. It's like, so okay, help me understand. How do I know what caused the issue? Well, can't tell you that. I was like, okay. So I said, all right, so how do we turn this back on? At that point, I'm just like, he said, well, I have to read you this warning. You've used this cap if you go over again. And at this point, I don't recall all the details. I just want to be all open about that. I mean, there was a warning, but it was basically, if you do it again, it's going to be an issue. We're going to cut you off again. And, I think that's what kind of stuck in my ear. So I said, look, I want you to understand, completely disagree with this whole concept of a data cap and cutting people off from the internet. There's no reason to do that. It's very irritating. I mean, like I often do with these customer service people, you tell them, I'm not mad at you, I'm irritated at this whole situation, so I just pass it on, and they appreciate that. And I told them, if this does happen again, I'm going to complain. I'm going to write to the mayor, I'm going to complain to the FCC, I'm going to go probably write up a blog post, do these things. And I know full well that, lots of people will say that sort of thing, and these poor guys will just sort of go, yep, I hear you, and they know a lot of people won't do it. And I just wanted to at least document it that I was going to do that. After that, he said he turned it back on, so we hung up. I went and talked to my roommates. He said, hey, we're using a bunch of data. I guess keep an eye on it. I thought about it, and I was like, I don't know what was using all this data. And then I realized, well, I do have an open access point. I have one of the routers that lets you actually turn on an open access.
Like a guest network?
Guest network, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's one access point. Well, there's actually 2 access points to cover the whole house, but really from...
What are you using?
I've got a couple. In the past, I've used different versions of Netgear routers, a DDWRT. There's actually 2 of them in the house just to kind of cover the whole house because it's actually a long house for whatever reason. That said, the main router, kind of the initial access point, about 6 months ago got switched over to what's known as an Sam Knows white box. It's actually the router that a company called Ask Sam put together to track broadband use and help build the national broadband map for the FCC. So for the last 6 months or so, all of my data use and speeds has been getting reported anonymously to the FCC, which I actually thought was kind of an interesting thing. So one of the things I have been exploring is trying to ask Sam, hey, I'd like to know my data only. I'm not asking for anybody else's. Where was that data going? What was being used? And that's a conversation that's still en route and has not bottomed out yet.
Nothing's happened yet.
No, I got an initial response back from a tech support guy, which was very vague and not helpful. So I kind of wrote back and said, that's not what I'm looking for. Can we just try again?
Well, because you're no stranger to networks in general, and your background includes kind of getting Xbox Live off the ground.
Yeah, and I spent 8 years basically working for Microsoft, helping build platform strategy and evangelizing Xbox Live.
So it's not that you're someone who doesn't know anything about network traffic. You know a fair amount, at least in terms of upload, download, etc.
Yep.
So that was the first month you said to your roommates,
yep.
Watch the broadband usage, which is really about as vague as you can get. Don't check email as often.
Well, so the one thing I did do is I realized, all right, something's using internet access, and I kind of thought it through, looked around, and I said, oh, you know what, I do have an open access point. So it's basically a guest account. I have one that's secured, lets everybody who has access, which really boils down to me, access the internal server and stuff. And then I have just a guest account, no password, people can log in, and friends come over all the time with their iPads or laptops, they just hop on and just use it. So I thought, well, maybe that was the issue. I mean, the house next door is actually a rental house, so there's people moving in and out all the time. Literally every weekend there's somebody new there. And if I was in a rental house and I was looking for my internet, I'd probably just go look and say, oh, there's one. Hey, it's fast. So I figured that might be it, so I turned that off and honestly forgot about it. I was like, all right, I think this is good. Went probably a month or so, and then I came back again, and the roommate was like, hey, internet's broken again. And I was like, okay.
Did you get that sinking feeling?
Yep.
I did get
that sinking feeling, because I was kind of like, I'll bet you it's the modem and it's the blinking lights. And I went down and I was like, yep. So I called. This time I called up the customer service line again, because I hadn't kept the piece of paper with their customer security group number. They passed me over again, and I talked to them and I said, all right, looks like we got cut off again. 1, I'm really irritated. I just want you to know that. I want to add that to the record. And 2, what do we need you to get turned on? He's like, well, nope, sorry, sir, you're not eligible. What do you mean you're eligible? Our policies, if you've been cut off twice within, and I think he said it was a 6-month period, that you are cut off for a year. I'm like, it's ridiculous. It's like a hanging judge. How do you... No, and I was really irritated. But again, I try to be polite to the people who are on the phone because they get beat up all the time for this sort of stuff. I'm like, all right, so let me please, I'd like to escalate this to your supervisor. He said, nope, sorry, there's no appeal. And he was being polite. I don't want to cast any aspersions on the tech support guy or the security guy. I mean, he's like, there's no appeal. I'm like, what do you mean there's no appeal? He's like, there's no appeal. Nothing's going to help. You've been cut off. I'm like, that's ridiculous. So then I said, all right, can you give me at least emails or phone numbers or names of people who should know that I'm going to go write about this. I'm going to post a blog post. I'm going to go and send letters to the FCC, and I'm going to create a polite stink. And he said, I don't have that, but I can pass you over to like our communications group or whatever it is. And I said, well, okay, so is that going to help if I talk to them and give them my stories? No. And it was interesting because when I was talking to him, I got a sense he had a lot of sympathy. He was sort of saying, no, they won't change it either. I have never seen anybody change it. And maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I did get a sense that he understood the situation, but there's nothing he could do. So I said, so really there's no reason for me to go and, give Comcast in this case the benefit of the doubt and give them a heads up that I'm going to go write this stuff because they're not going to listen. He said, I have never seen anybody change this decision, period. I was like, all right, forget it. I'm not going to go waste my time and go contact these guys. So we wrapped up again politely, this time without the modem being turned on. And I went off and basically wrote my initial blog post where I just kind of detailed it, and I said, here's what happened.
What was the URL again? It's
for the blog?
For the blog post?
The blog, it's ozymandias.com.
Okay.
OZYMANDIAS.com.
Yeah, I wasn't exactly sure how to say that either. I'm having problems with the pronunciation.
You know what? I was an English major, and
really, you too?
Yeah,
that was an English major as well.
And that was one of those classic poems by Shelley, which is actually why I picked the domain years and years ago. And then, of course, The Watchman came out, and everybody's like, "Oh, it's The Watchman." I'm like, "No,
Too much geek crossover fact behind you. It's Bloom County.
Yeah, Bloom County.
Yeah,
yep,
some originals. It seems.
The lithographs,
but
yeah, but signed by him. Yeah, I love Bloom County.
Okay, so you've got geek cred like through and through. From English major geek to understanding.
You have to pan around and get some shots of that later, just so people can see. They're awesome.
For context. Okay, so you're effectively cut off. You blog this entry, this first entry,
yep.
What will turn out to have been several.
Yep.
What happens then?
So then people started just picking it up and just saying, "Wait, what? I don't." So first, there was a little bit of confusion. Some people were like, you were using it for business class. Some people didn't understand, how much I might be consuming. People didn't. There were people who just didn't read through for the whole thing.
What? So, wait. You mean people comment before actually reading or listening to the whole?
It was shocking.
Wow, I didn't realize that.
There were people who thought I was an idiot. Fair enough. Approve. I mean.
No, my favorites are. Well, that's never happened to me.
Yeah. Well. Okay. Yeah, I mean, and the big thing was that there were a lot of people who didn't quite, there were a lot of people who sort of fell into the range of, well, it's never going to happen to me, and you just used way too much bandwidth, and you exceeded a cap that you knew about, so...
But wait a second. What I don't understand is, I've heard stories where people have exceeded the cap, but they've never had a slap on the wrist.
Yeah, and that's...
So how I don't understand how a policy can be put in place at corporate level, and that happened. Yeah. Why did they single you out?
I don't know. I can say that having looked at my comments and searched online, the cap, in this case Comcast cap at 250 gigabytes a month, is enforced selectively. I've had friends send me the little picture of the bandwidth meter.
Oh, the bandwidth meter being this little, bar? That's it?
Well,
so anemic.
Let me just pause there for a sec. When I go to the website, it's not there. So let's back.
You can't see it?
No, it literally doesn't exist. And when I looked around online, I heard a lot of other people in my comments and other people saying, I don't see it here. It turns out that Comcast right now has a problem. Might have been because they merged accounts, might have been because of some other back-end stuff. For whatever reason, there's some amount of people, and I'm not going to try to quantify how many because I don't know, but significant, who literally don't see the meter at all. And I am one of them. So even if I had gone in, which I didn't do, I'm not going to pretend that I did. I just didn't care because I didn't think it was an issue. I'd never had a problem for 9 years. Why should it be an issue, right?
Right.
So I went, took a look. It's not there, and a lot of people don't have it. So, but back to the point. Other people have sent me pictures of theirs to show them over the line for 3 or 4 months in a row by 100 gigs or so, and they haven't been called, contacted, or cut off. So there appears to be some sort of selective enforcement going on right now. Now, here's the thing. The thing that I didn't mention about the second call with Comcast is it was only in that call that I finally connected the dots and realized it was the upstream bandwidth that was biting me. Because again, I pushed hard this time. Because I was like, okay, you're telling me I've used too much bandwidth. How much? And they did give me some number. And I don't remember what it was. It was 300 something. I mean, it was high. High according to them.
According to them, right.
Right. So it was over their policy cap. So, and I have no reason to believe that their measurements are inaccurate. I mean,
yeah, still there's no third-party audit, and it comes down to every single packet that transfers over your modem, whether it's a legitimate one or an illegitimate one, counts against your cap, which that's a different level of BS.
Right. Well, there's a whole lot of other points you can go explore, but at the end of the day, for the sake of simplifying the discussion, I said, all right, I'm willing to believe that grossly your number is accurate, and I'm willing to believe I'm over. I don't know why. Can you tell me what was the data that was putting it over? What was using it? And they said, oh, we've got a bandwidth meter. I was like, well. When I was talking to him again, to be fair, I had not looked for the meter, so I didn't know it wasn't there.
Right.
But, had I even gone, I wouldn't have seen it. Had I gone, I've seen pictures of the bandwidth meter. It's very nice. It's a bar.
That's it.
It doesn't even break it out into upload or download. So, what I was pushing on him was like, so what are you measuring? And I said, oh, wait a sec. Something clicked to me. I was like, are you measuring upstream and downstream bandwidth? And they said, yes, we are. I was like,
so you've got the upload overhead. Every time you download something, you're uploading data as well.
Yep.
Most people don't know that.
Yep. No, absolutely. I mean, it's a round trip. That's how the net works. But on top of that, it suddenly clicked. Several months ago, by probably not coincidence with all these issues, I started using some of these new cloud backup services. So I installed Carbonite. Actually, to be fair, a month or two before that, I tried Mozy because they had unlimited backup. And I liked them until they changed their policy and said, well, we're not unlimited anymore. I'm like, well, bye-bye. So then I went to their competitor Carbonite, and Carbonite had a more nuanced solution to it. They said, we're not going to limit how much stuff you can back up. However, once you get past some certain threshold, we're going to slow down the upload rate to let other people have a fair shot at it. And I'm not thrilled with that because there's a risk, the server could go down, you might have a hard drive crash, you might have issues the longer that your data is not up on the server, the greater the risk that you're, of losing it. But it's a fair solution because at least it's still going up. So I started using them and they started uploading. And then a few weeks ago now, 3 weeks, maybe 4, Amazon reacted to Apple's iCloud music stuff, and they had a really nice, compelling offering. They said, hey, we'll take any of your AAC/M4A music that you have, and we will upload it to the cloud, and you can access it using Amazon's cloud player. And I work as a consultant. I work at coffee shops. I'm just like, great, that's a deal. So one night I popped up DV Power Amp, and I just ran a batch conversion, and simply kicked out M4A copy of every single track I have. It was easy to do. The metadata is perfectly clean since I ripped them all myself. I mean, I'm one of those people that I used to work in music stores 20 years ago.
So you're legit, is what you're saying.
I still buy CDs used when I buy a new album because I want to rip them losslessly. Mm-hmm. I don't like the compressed formats people download, and that's opinion. That's probably too geeky. Point is, I've got all that data. I've got the original data down there in a compressed but lossless format twice, FLAC and WMA. Unfortunately, I had to do it twice in order to stream to 2 different types of devices in the house because they don't support one or the other. And then I've been thinking in the past maybe I would go ahead and just add the AAC copies just to use with Apple's ecosystem, and never got around to it until finally Amazon had a really compelling offer. Upload it all, and if it's music, we'll store it for free. And you could stream it in.
So wait, these, just to kind of put some context here, these are not esoteric services. Backup, music, Amazon. We're talking about huge brands, huge services that
Amazon,
that people are using. They're using them.
Yeah.
So I don't understand.
Well, and there are also a new wave of these cloud services where people are creating this whole new concept of, hey, the cloud is here. Now, the cloud is overused. It's a term that we're just, whatever, it is what it is. But
we get what the cloud is, the idea that data lives somewhere remotely.
Now, your average consumer, I mean, the cloud has advantages because, just think of the marketing message. You can upload all your music to Amazon servers that we store in racks that let you have, forget that.
Right.
You just stick it in the cloud.
It's just easy, and you just don't, you set it there and you just don't think about it.
Yeah.
Backup, you just don't even think about it. It's done.
So you're right. I mean, these are services that are new services that are coming along. These are services that a few years ago nobody really thought about.
So then to rewind, just slightly, the 250 gig cap. It's an arbitrary number. They just literally pulled it out of thin air, set it forth in 2008 when broadband speeds were different. I don't even think DOCSIS 3 was available specifically in the Seattle market.
DOCSIS actually rolled out after the cap. That's actually been one of the complaints people had is, hey, you rolled out DOCSIS 3 and increased the amount of bandwidth available in the Seattle area immensely. I'm not going to quantify how much because I don't want to put lie.
Right.
But I mean, it's huge.
Well, I switched from, as I said, a business class at I think it was 50 down, 10 up, to residential class 105 down, 10 up, and saved probably about half the money and got a faster download. Of course, business class also has 105 down, 50 up, but at a substantially, the rates literally doubled, and it just doesn't seem to be, it doesn't match, not just necessarily what I believe my usage pattern is or was, but it just, $400 a month just for that service, for business class, admittedly. But this is where I thought, I don't think I'm using that much bandwidth, and that's why I switched to residential. This has got me, it's got me on edge. I mean, I'm going around the house going, something's sucking bandwidth. I'm looking at, and I looked around. I did a couple of articles of how I went through and narrowed down what is siphoning the bandwidth rate. And it turned out it was a security camera, and I was only able to nail that down because it's a free tool available for Mac OS X. Can't remember what it's called, like SNMP monitor or SNMP testing tool.
Yeah,
it was a new version that showed you basically by using that connection to, I use an Apple Airport.
Yep.
And it showed me you're streaming this much bandwidth out through your WAN port, and I was like, oh my God, something is doing something. And it turned out the security camera is just 24/7. So security cameras, online backup, music. These aren't things that are just for the geeks.
Yeah. Well, here, just to your point, that whole story you just told.
Who's gonna go that? Who knows?
How in the hell does your mom do that?
Exactly.
I mean, it's just like.
Oh, but wait.
Comcast answer has been, go look at the bandwidth meter, and I'm like, all right, now I've got a little bar, and I can see sometimes it's above your magic line, sometimes it's below the magic line. Great, Mom. Don't do that.
Right. There's a huge, so setting aside that arbitrary cap, which has not moved despite getting faster options available and paying more for those options.
And their price is dropping to actually deliver that service, don't forget. I mean, the cost of delivering internet access drops about half every year. I mean, right now it's about 2 to 4 cents. I think it's 2 to 4 cents a megabit per user per month to the home. So, you're even you start doing the math, you're like, all right, $5 more than covers your cost. Now, I want to be fair, too. These companies deserve to make a profit. These companies invested a huge amount of capital up front to build out these networks, and so they can, they should be able to go monetize them and get that investment back in a fair return. I'm all for that.
But what about the anti-competitive nature? I mean, in Seattle...
Well, there is no competition. That's the biggest thing. If you have competition... Which I mean, right now I have no choice for any sort of broadband service over 10 megabits. I just don't. I have DSL. I just got a confirmation from Quest. They're going to put in a little 3DSL phone lines. I have something coming into here. There is literally not a single solution out there that is actually competitive or works. I mean, you have a couple of the wireless, clear wire, kind of 4G-ish providers who sort of claim they
don't get me. That's a completely different. A video on Clear is a completely. Trust me, they're
oversaturated.
I have my issues.
I've read the reviews. I'm not going to touch it.
No, their customer service is a nightmare.
Great, good to know. So
don't. Yeah.
So basically, if I want to have real competitive competition, I can't. Verizon never got here. There's no fiber in the neighborhood.
None in mine either.
So it's frustrating.
But see, the coaxial cable that's coming to your house, it's not that it's not functioning. It's just that the only service that you can use for that coaxial cable. I mean, it's like, let's take another step and go into another analogy you've made and I have made as well. The idea of services, and I'm just going to break them down. Water services. If you go over, you don't really go over, you just pay more. You pay for how much water you use. Trash, garbage, sewage is kind of tied into water in some capacities. Electricity. You've got, let's imagine wireless data. Okay, so you pay for a plan of, I don't know what phone you use. I'm on an iPhone, so I've got like a 4 gig data plan or whatever it is.
I'm on a Windows 6.5 platform rooted to run Android on AT&T.
That's geeky. So you've got so much data that you can push down, and if you go over that, you pay more for the overage. They don't cut you off. If any wireless company, if any water company, if any electricity company, if any of these companies cut you off, they'd be run out of town.
You want a great analogy?
With torches and a pitchfork.
Here's the great analogy. Broadband providers, especially those who serve TV or VoIP, voice over IP, as most of your audience knows, they run one wire into your house. So in my case, Comcast runs a single cable into my house, right? That cable...
Well, I don't know if it's Comcast that runs it in your house. Is it owned by the city? Did the city... Is it...
It's a great question. I don't know. I would like to find out.
I don't think Comcast owns that cable.
Probably not, actually, because the city, they have a deal that allows Comcast to use it. I don't know is the short answer. But the cable comes into the house. Comcast has a little box that splits off, that's a splitter basically, right? Mm-hmm. And so they arbitrarily take the amount of bandwidth, let's just call it X, and they split it into 2 channels. And one channel is where they go feed their TV signals in. Another channel is where they go feed their broadband service in. So the interesting analogy somebody made was, it's a little bit like you have water coming into the house. And the big pipe with the nice clean water goes to the washing machine, right? With the coin meter, and that's your TV that you pay for. And then the smaller pipe goes to just the water you use. It's slower and there's less of it, but at least it's there. And maybe that's the internet. But the thing that's fascinating about this is, remember, one pipe arbitrarily split into 2 different pieces. One piece on the TV side, they slice and dice the service they give you different tiers and charge you a lot of money for that, right? On the broadband side, they slice and dice that amount of bandwidth and they charge you some money for that too. On the broadband side, in Comcast's case, I currently have this cap. Again, we don't know where it came from. Nobody's ever been informed. There's no input coming into it and it hasn't been updated in 3 years. But they drew a line. And once I hit that 250 gigabyte line, in this twice, I'm cut off. You know, that's it. On the TV side, imagine if I had turned on TV and I just turned into an HD channel, right? And imagine I just said, I like HD, and I run it 24 hours a day, and I run it for the entire month, right? I would consume, depending on, like my conservative numbers, I went out and looked around. I don't know how much an HD cable stream consumes, but it's pretty high quality. So I said, you know, let's go for the lower bar. Let's go look at a Netflix HD stream because they're having to compress and fit onto that narrower broadband pipe that comes out.
And I think, according to Jake, who is behind the camera, suggesting that the Comcast or cable providers are likely pushing H.264 compression as well. So it could be in the same ballpark at this point.
Okay, well, good. So let's just say, I mean, the numbers I found for Netflix were for HD is 1 to 1.5 gigs an hour for HD. So you go do the math, you quickly find out you land 700, 800 gigabytes if I just left my HD signal feeding on the whole time.
One. So if you had 2 TVs, you'd have double that, or 3 TVs, you'd have triple that.
And so now we start seeing the problem.
And they never cut you off. They don't say you can't watch. You watch too much TV.
Yeah, you can't watch any more TV.
Not for a year.
It's not going to happen.
Why? Because you can go to a satellite provider, or you can just cut them off completely.
You know what? I think partly people would just flip. I mean, TV is. I won't say TV is a right, but I think people's minds, the idea of not being able to watch as much TV as you want is so ingrained that they couldn't do it. So it's just fascinating to me that the same pipe, data coming in, just split into 2 different channels, are being treated differently. One you get capped on and can't use anymore. One where they make a lot of money, they will never turn it off for you, even though I would technically consume more bandwidth coming down the pipe there.
Well, let's just assume the cap. This arbitrary cap, I'm just going to say it's arbitrary because it is legitimate. Just for argument's sake. Let's in pretend land where Comcast seems to live, and other ISPs as well. Comcast is not the only one that imposes these arbitrary restrictions. Let's just say that was real and it was legit. They argue that only the top 1% ever come close to that. So that would leave 99% of the people who have access to it not really using that much. Yeah. Or if it's just the top 1% and they say, well, they use 40% of the bandwidth. Well, I'm not a mathematical guy. I was an English major much like yourself. Yeah. But if only 1% is using 40%, what's the other 99% using? Are they using 2%? Are they using 5%? What are they using, or what are they not using? They shift the numbers around because it's a marketing game. Well, some of us can see right through the BS. Like, it does not add up. It's an arbitrary number. And if only 1%, I'm getting excited. If only 1%, I think I can do that. I'm going to let you be calm. If only 1% use 40% of it, why is it there in the first place?
This is one of the reasons I'm pushing hard and saying we need some transparency. I'll be the first to say that the networks, cable networks, broadband ISPs have the right to manage their networks.
And I agree.
My biggest issue is that I got cut off entirely. And that, I believe, is has been purposely put in place to protect their existing TV distribution businesses. Because, Occam's razor says, well, why, you have other reasons, other solutions to people that might be potentially using too much bandwidth. Let's put aside the argument about whether that's actually happening and whether they're actually getting saturated and all that. That's a whole separate conversation. At the end of the day, if you posit that somebody is using way too much, they could easily say, hey, you went over some line, we're going to charge you extra at some rate we pre-disclose. Or, you know what, after you've used your 250 gigs, we're going to throttle you, so you're going to be a lot slower. This is kind of similar to what Carbonite's doing, except they're doing it for their upstream to their services. We're not going to cut you off entirely, we're just going to slow you down until the beginning of next month, and then, God bless, go to town and enjoy yourself. Instead, they cut you off entirely. And, Occam's razor seems to say the only logical reason to do that is to restrict the competition of services that consume that data. And the ones that are currently consuming the most data, and you keep seeing reports out on the web, are things like Netflix and Hulu and these streaming services.
But they weren't even really, they were kind of a reality back in 2008. We were still just beginning to understand and getting into streaming media, YouTube and beyond.
Right.
But nowhere near what they are today.
Right. Well, if you roll it back 15 years, we remember a time when this whole concept of internet video was kind of this little weird thing on a reel, and it was a postage stamp. It's like, yeah, okay, it's kind of interesting, and then it's just evolved and evolved. Now it's to companies that actually deliver these services, it's a real competitive threat. I mean, you read interesting articles about the Hulu management, which is basically built out of people that spun out of the TV business to try to build a solution that could actually work with the companies. And they've been incredibly successful doing exactly that. And now they have a problem because they're trying to sell it. And they have this weird double-edged sword where it's become too successful. So the networks aren't comfortable with it. The people they're trying to sell to are concerned. Like, who knows? All the big companies, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, are probably looking at Hulu and saying that would be interesting. They're interested in buying it, but then they go, hey, you're not selling the system and the services with the deals in place because all of these providers want to go renegotiate it. And there's a lot of just, behind the scenes and in front of the scenes, negotiating going on where people who have existing legacy businesses are terrified about they're being disintermediated by the internet, basically. So one of my questions to Comcast is, are you prioritizing your services over open broadband?
And if they were, and I doubt they'd ever admit that they were, I mean, not unless it was under some kind of court order, what can be done about it?
Well, and if they say we're not, then I would ask them, then why do you cut me off and other people off completely?
Because it's a policy. I'm devil's advocate. That's what because that's what the policy says.
And
but
why
if the
did you
policy
run that policy instead of more consumer-friendly solutions?
Because they don't care. And honestly, as much as they say Comcast cares, the fact that they've let this situation go on as long as it has, and it's only been admittedly a few days, but in internet time, that's an eon. I actually think they care, but I think they care about their existing TV business. I mean, this is not a decision that they decided, over a couple of days. They said, let's just cut them off, This is a decision that they would have argued about internally for months. They knew they would get a lot of flack for it, and they purposely picked an anti-competitive, anti-consumer path that was going to cause them a lot of pain down the road. And I'm sure there's smart people at Comcast who knew this was going to happen. They picked that path for a reason, and you have to ask yourself why. And I'm the first to say maybe I just don't understand enough to see another reason. I have yet to hear any answer that is actually semi-compelling that explains why you have to cut somebody off completely from the internet. So what would you like to come from all this? And I know what I would like to see happen. And admittedly, again, I'm currently a residential TV purchaser. I've got DVRs and everything. And believe me, Comcast gets their monthly bill. I was business class internet, now residential, actually considering going back to business after this flap. Because once you meet someone who this has actually happened to, and you hear their story, you start to wonder, well, this could easily happen to me.
Well, if you go back to business, give me a call. I got a server needs uploading, and I'll just drag it over to your place.
Well, actually, I think Locker Gnome, we've got, if you'd like to use our, we've got a business relationship now. You've been very kind to help us. I'd like to be able to help you. We've got one in our downtown offices. Is that okay, Jake?
Sure.
All right.
Thank you, Jake. I will haul over a big ass raid box.
Because it's unlimited. It's unmetered, and we're paying for it in a business class capacity.
Yep.
But I'm thinking about, even in my home office, going back to business. Even though in my current usage, I don't think that after I turn off the security camera, I'm going to come close to that 250 gig cap. It's still that threat that it's uncomfortable, and I don't know.
That's the thing. It's the threat. It's the hangman, and it's being applied.
I don't like that.
It's being applied inconsistently. There are people. You can find people all over the web who are like, I've been over for months. They're not calling me. Is this real? Is this not? I mean, there's selective enforcement, and so
how can they do that though? It's just like a lottery. I mean, it just doesn't sound. It doesn't sound legal to me, and I'm not a lawyer. I'm far from it, but it just doesn't sound like they can do this.
It's the Comcast Death Lottery. I don't know. I mean, case lottery.
Well, it is. It's like the two blinking blue lights of death. You know? It's like, wow. And other people, of course, have jumped in and said this has happened to them. Some people said that it hasn't. What would you like to have come from all this? I've
been thinking about this. It's like, all right, be king for a day if I could
think idealistically, what?
And again, I mean, I have some sympathy for broadband providers because they do need to manage their network. So, I'm not going to be the guy that says, give it all to us for free and just keep it going. I mean, that's not reasonable.
And to clarify, I don't mind caps. I just want to know what they are, and I want to know that if I go over them, I'm going to pay for having gone over the caps that I've agreed to in the service.
So I would disagree slightly personally, because I personally think that caps cutting someone off entirely make no sense, because I don't see any justification.
Right, cutting someone off entirely, yeah. I agree with you there.
Yeah, doing something other than cutting someone off after you get to a large, whatever number is, I can agree with. So first thing I would want is I would say, you know what, no more complete disconnection from the internet. Your data cap policy or your data cutting off policy stops. The second point I want to see would be just transparency. I mean, right now, nobody knows how the cap was set. Nobody had any input into it. It hasn't changed in 3 years. So I thought about this, and I'd like to see maybe the equivalent of a commission or an advisory committee where you can actually have people, from across different areas, maybe tech bloggers, maybe a college, maybe a business, but basically people who actually use their service in a real world environment. Meet with representatives from Comcast once a year, and maybe Comcast buys some pizza, you all sit down for a couple hours, they'll show some numbers that aren't too confidential about data usage and what they're seeing. People, like me, potentially, I'd be happy to be on the commission there and just come in, and they can ask, and people like me would come in and say, hey, what about this new OnLive thing? I mean, this is really compelling, and it uses a ton of bandwidth going both ways. We need to figure out how to kind of encompass that in a way, because it's not going to go away. And then my hope would be Comcast would let that conversation advise they're updating their cap and their thinking, and they would publish that in some public place and talk about how they're doing it, and have a conversation with their customers instead of this black box.
Well, they argue that they are having a conversation on Twitter. I kind of put the screws to Bill the other day when I was just hammering him so hard, and to his credit, he was very cordial. I think I was a little over the top, but I kept pushing him on hard questions that he just couldn't answer. I mean, that their answers it was marketing spin, and I don't swallow marketing tripe to begin with, and he was just towing the company line, and I didn't like that.
They don't have answers to some of these questions because they do have these conflicts of interest, and they have a conflict of interest when you're serving a TV business on one hand and charging differently, and to have a broadband business on the other hand charging differently. I mean, they've done an amazing balancing job of being able to build up this business and slice and dice what's effectively one pipe coming into your house. And I actually respect that. I mean, they have every right to do that. I just think once you get to the point where you cut somebody off, it just doesn't work.
So there's no effective competition. You can't get fiber here. You can't get equivalent broadband from another provider.
Right, and I've got no recourse. I mean, it's frustrating. And then the last thing I want to see is, just make the bandwidth meter work. I mean, as I said, the first thing they need to do is just stop cutting people off entirely. But I believe there's probably some line, let's call it the bandwidth cap, or what was once the bandwidth cap, that should be negotiated in conversation with advisors, as I talked about. Once you get that number, if you cross that line, you want to have some sort of meter, some sort of tools that tell you, are you getting close to it? When is my internet going to be slow?
Yeah,
not cut off.
Like emailed or texted or some other kind of communication.
Email would be an interesting thing. I mean, I hear a lot of people have it. I would have been happy to get an email that says you're about to go over your cap.
Right.
A text would have been convenient too. A bandwidth meter that shows up on the website, that would be nice.
Well, something a bit more detailed, like time of day. I would even go as far as to say I wouldn't even mind them telling me if most of it was HTTP traffic, if it was from these websites, it was from these sources, because then I would get a better idea, what's this unknown? What there's something happening.
Well, there's a balancing game there. I mean, there's a balancing act there, because the more they show you, the more they're looking at your traffic, and I can understand their concern. But let's start with the basics. Make the meter show up. Great. All right, now that it's showing up, I'm seeing one bar. That doesn't help me.
Right.
At least break into upload or download. Tell me what's going on there. All right, that's still not helping me much. Let me drill into it. I mean, websites have had this clicky technology for a while, and you can click and things appear, and I'm sure somebody can show how to do that. Show me what happened in that month. And I think, as you say, it's fair enough to have, under the security of a customer login, at least broadly anonymized types of data, like HTTP. They could probably pick out video streaming, or just call it video streaming.
Right.
Voice over IP. I mean, a lot of these things are on ports. They're well known. They can actually break it out into major chunks. I would actually support them stopping at that point, because you don't want specific websites and all gets into that. Just broadly show what that's there. And by the way, maybe they even have that sort of depth being opt-in. by default, they show you upload and download.
Sure.
And then you, as a consumer, if you say, you know what, I want to understand this a bit more, I'm giving you permission, Comcast, to go and look a little more closely at my data and tell me what are the chunks that are consuming it. I think that that gets them past any legal concerns, and it lets me, as a consumer, actually understand what's happening there. The other thing I wanted to do is assuming you have to have some sort of way of throttling this bandwidth, and again, I'm not convinced that's the case at all, because price keeps dropping, blah, 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 but let's put that aside. Assuming you have to have some sort of cap where they slow you down, give software developers a way to make their apps intuitive to users. This is back to the mom question. Our mom will never know how to do this. Our mom will never install DDWRT and go find some crazy wiki that has errors in it and work their way through it. Our mom will probably barely be able to find the bandwidth meter, and then she'll be like, okay, great.
But even then, they would argue that, well, they're never going to use that much bandwidth. They would argue that. I disagree, but...
Well, so we'll come back to that in a sec. But that's a great discussion right there. So let's put a pin in that for a second. Just finish the... what I'd like to see somebody like Comcast and other internet providers do is just come up with an open API set and just basically say, hey, Amazon, we'll use Amazon. We have here an API set that you can use that will allow a Comcast or other broadband provider customer to sign in with the customer's permission, and we will send you anonymous data. And so every time, once a day or once every 3 days when I'm uploading something and I'm just streaming data because I'm uploading my music library to Amazon, Amazon can actually put in some logic that says, hey, you're getting close to this cap, based on whatever numbers you've set. Are you sure you want to do this? Do you want to just pause until next month? Let the software developer actually have tools to make the experience better. I mean,
for the average user. Because I think your user may say, well, just use a QoS and you'll be fine.
Yeah, again, back to the mom question. Right. By the way, Comcast serves lots of moms, so...
so I hear.
Yeah.
So, I would argue that the moms, our parents, could very well come close to that cap without even knowing it, or they're not using it at all, so they're stuck.
What's the, do you know what an hour of HD video takes on your camera there? Broadly? So somebody I was talking to had a small HD camera.
It's a 25 megabit, so probably, it used to be 13 gigs an hour on SD.
Oh, wow, on SD.
On SD.
So this is the raw stuff. So I was even going to go, so you're way higher than I was at, but your point is just going to make the point all the better. I was talking to some guy, he had a little small HD camera that he was filming stuff with, and had a 32 gig SD card in there, and he said, capture about an hour and a half of video. I was thinking about that, 32 gigs for an hour and a half. You go to a wedding, you start filming your kids, you're going to start collecting all this video, and you're going to be having piles of it. Sure, you might edit some, sure you can throw away a lot, blah, blah. When you have a lot higher resolution source material, those numbers just go up. So then you say, okay, that's one data source. I've got my music, which I might store in different things. I've got my photos. Like everybody knows, I shoot in RAW, and then I do processing. So I've got kind of the JPEG and the RAW of each image stored there. And then you start collecting that over the days and the months and the years. I mean, I've got my server, literally years. It's like my photos are all, photos /1998 / Cancun, or whatever the trip is, or something along those lines. So that stuff starts piling up, right? I've got Netflix streams I might want to watch. I play video games online. I might want to go play on live or look at Gaikai. I've got all these things that all start adding up. That's ignoring the fact that I might want to start using something like uploading all my music to Amazon or uploading my data to Carbonite, right? So that could blow me over. It's just one person doing this. And by the way, this has all been about me in this little spiel right here, right? What happens with roommates? What happens with family? When you have 3 or 4 people in the house, I know broadband providers would much rather have a dream world where they sell you a different IP address and a different plan for everybody using it in the house. That's not the real world. They get one pipe that comes into the router, and the router splits it off, and a lot of people do stuff. I mean, in my case, I have 2 TVs, and I have 2, they each have consoles on them, and there were HD streams for Netflix going into both of them at the same time a bunch of times, because you have somebody wants to watch one thing, somebody wants to watch another. It's not hard to imagine a world where this cap is going to be hit over and over again. Back to the transparency point, Comcast doesn't share any data about how many people are getting cut off.
Right.
Or history. Are more and more people getting cut off over time? I guarantee you the answer is yes. And I guarantee you that the reason that they're not enjoying this conversation is because their own internal data shows it's becoming more and more of a problem. And this is actually why I feel somewhat hopeful, is I do believe policy is going to have to change because it just doesn't match the real world. And so it's not just, you know, somebody yelling shrilly or being frustrated. That's fine, I had my stake, you keep driving that train and there's a big brick wall ahead of you and it's just going to keep getting worse for you. Now's the time to change.
Even if they raise the cap, if they still keep we'll kick you off for a year, I'm not done. I seriously, I'm kind of taking this up as kind of a cause. As a Comcast customer who's currently residential and considering going back to business and always pushing legitimate traffic, this is what was confusing the hell out of me. I'm like, Dropbox, I was having an issue because we do a lot of HD video and we do these transfers
all the time.
And I was just like, oh my god, I had no idea. And then the security camera, things that you set it and you forget about.
And by the way, it's not just us, those companies are thriving. Dropbox, you're probably on a 50 or 100 gig account, I'm guessing?
No, actually, I'm still on 10 free.
You squeaked it?
No, I keep it clean. You know, I watch exactly what's going on.
I actually paid for the 50. I mean,
that's Jake, you got 100?
Yeah.
And there's no way. I mean, if I had a 100 gig Dropbox, I'd be dead in a day.
Yeah. Well, you have, I want to find a prop, and I don't even know if it's nearby, but I do have a prop. You know,
here. Actually, this would be a good time to tell you that right now, Andre is accessing an access point that's nearby to connect to the internet. This is an a neighbor's open access point?
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, so I've got some here. Yeah, so just drives. These are just,
right.
you know, just pile of laptop drives, and there's 250, 300, 500 gig drives. I mean, these are old ones that have kind of swapped up over time.
IDE, SATA.
Yeah.
Just curious how old, that's all.
They're probably, they're SATA.
Not that old, but it's still, okay.
But, yeah,
so,
any one of these drives, here, we're just going to take one completely at random. This drive is a 160 gig SATA drive. You know? Now,
so if you back this up to the internet using a Comcast residential connection,
I'd have blown through 160 gigs, so I'd already be more than, you know, halfway to the cap. Now, by the way, you can't buy a laptop today without a drive that's at least a 500 gig drive, right? You could buy a little Passport, Western Digital Passport, 100 gig one for. No, sorry, it was a 500 gig one for $90. I just saw like something on Costco.
Cheap.
Yeah.
Right.
So I mean, you've got all these things where people are backing up data and doing stuff, but people also know these things die. In fact, I probably have some of these because I was worried about them dying, or I was updating a PlayStation, or just doing something.
I've got a few laying around that I don't even have any idea what's on them anymore.
I mean, it's completely legitimate to think that people are going to have more. I mean, let me put it this way: our data size is going to get smaller or bigger in the future?
Right.
It's not rocket science.
Right. Well, you know, they are stemming the tide if they think that the cap can be there forever. So let's just assume that they do move the cap up accordingly. Let's say they move it to 500 gigs. If they still impose, no, we're going to kick you off. Like I said, I'm not done. I think this is just it's wrong. I'm not saying it's a right. Just like you said, I think that access to information is a right, and it's not that you can't get a DSL or you can't get online. It's that I think by doing that, by effectively cutting you off from their service for not doing anything effectively wrong other than violating an arbitrary cap, I think is I think is snaky.
Yeah, right.
That's very snaky.
So
and I think the media. Sorry, not to interrupt, Andre.
No, please.
I think the media that I talked to were afraid to touch the story.
I had some hints of that from different media where they.
Not going to name any names.
I'm not naming any names, but I mean there were some media who actually had to go upstairs and off the record they said there was concern because Comcast. In fact, I'm not going to go into details because I don't want to get anywhere close to disclosing anything. But there was concerns, and in fact, in one case, I'm going to call it an outlet, was going to pass on the story until suddenly a competitor popped up, and they said, "Oh, that kicked us into action to go do it."
Amazing what competition will do.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of competition.
It gets as a
here's the
consumer advocate. It really gets under my skin.
Well, the best part is Comcast answers, well, you should have been on a business class. So if you think you're going to use a lot of data, you need to go get a business class account. All right, I disagree with the premise, but assuming that's true, my problem is once I've proven I need to use that amount of data, I'm ineligible to go move to the business class.
They wouldn't let you. So they said, you can't use residential anymore. Well, then give me business. No, you can't get business because you're kicked off of residential. Yeah. So it's like
you are ineligible for both. Then it's very clear. Once you've used the data, once you've shown you need to use the data that they've set a cap to, you're not allowed to use the data that they've set the cap to.
see, like I said, it keeps me going back. I moved to residential to save money, and a substantial amount, because I've also got their TV package.
Well,
I'm not on the phone.
Save like hundreds of dollars.
Yeah,
a month, right?
so I can't do that if I have business internet and residential. They're like two completely separate cities.
Right.
And so I can't effectively maximize what I'm doing. Because, I mean, I'm watching, I'm calculating. I'm like, well, we're not using that much data. And we do a bit of Netflix streaming and Hulu and, some amount of VoIP, but largely web streaming and uploading. But I don't think I would come close to hitting that 250 gig cap. It's just that fear. And when companies control by fear, I don't like buying into that system, but unfortunately, I don't have an alternative.
Right.
I can't go to a
fear,
fiber customer.
I just want to point out the fear is magnified because you don't even know if the cap's going to be enforced.
Right.
Even if you draw past the line that's been drawn in the sand, you find plenty of people who are like, I think I'm okay, except I haven't been called. I mean,
well, and that's what's upsetting, I think, in a lot of these comments that I've seen, a lot of trolls, really. Well, it never happened to me. How's that adding to the conversation? Just because it doesn't happen to you doesn't mean it's not going to happen to someone that you know. And even if you don't know that person, that still happened to them.
Yeah.
I'm probably more incensed about this happening to you than I would have been about. I mean, I'd have been upset if it had happened to me. Don't get me wrong, but
don't worry,
to see
have
it,
hope. It might happen to you yet.
if I'm lucky, if I'm lucky. Well, I guess the real irony is that
Actually,
this video will be transferred and uploaded by way of a Comcast connection.
And once it's up there, it's kind of interesting. You almost wonder if you just bought yourself some protection because
if they do, right?
I mean, it could be interesting. You should just go and run to 251 gigs and see if they cut you off. If they don't, go to 200, 300, 400. Try to find that line.
I like playing by, honestly, if someone says forward a rule that makes sense, I like playing by that rule. That's
kind of my point. What's the line of, I'm just saying, maybe that's how you test it and find out when they actually call you.
To bring up what you said earlier, the people that you've dealt with have been very cordial. They've been
very true.
And the people that I've dealt with locally have been just as nice. I mean, because I've dealt with them for different issues that I've had, and they've always been resolved to a great degree of my satisfaction. And they've been friendly every step of the way. I'm not going to name any names, not to violate anything that they've done right or wrong, but they've always been good about that, about responding and taking care of it. Where I have the issue is getting through this draconian, something that doesn't make any sense and isn't moving. So the cap stays here, even though the broadband speeds, I still have the same amount of time in the day today at this speed as I did at this speed with the same cap.
Yeah.
You can do a lot more with a faster connection simultaneously that you couldn't do before.
You're going to hit your cap, depending on which one you're at, infinitely faster than I ever did.
Oh, honestly, I don't even know if I'm in the top 1%. Looking at the stats, after I turned off the camera and the Dropbox and things, I'm not as worried as I was before.
I just meant do the extra speed you have, the ability to upload something quickly means that if you had a need to use that data, you're going to get that even sooner. Yeah.
But it's not. I'm concerned because the arbitrary nature, and it's been, how long has this been the second cutoff? You've been offline for offline?
About a week.
A week.
About a week.
And they haven't. The city hasn't responded.
Nope.
FCC hasn't responded, other than auto responses.
Yep.
Comcast definitely has not responded.
Nope.
The media has covered it, but the media, to their credit, they did cover it because it is a story, and we all see why it's a story. But they almost dovetailed each story that I saw or read, with a few exceptions, with Comcast line. You would have to download 60,000 songs to. I don't know where the hell they get that number from, or how that's anywhere near relevant, because no one does that, right? You download songs, but you also stream video, you also visit websites, you also email, you also upload photos, you also transfer this, you also do that, you also do backup, security, all these things that you do.
Well, this is kind of why I want to it's a great conversation to have, because I'd really like to focus the media's attention down on those tough questions that need to be asked.
What are those questions? In your mind?
But so I'll get to them in a sec here. But I want to have that conversation about the actual issue, because right now a lot of the press basically falls into a David versus Goliath kind of thing. And I'd be the first to say it's not about me. I just happen to be a guy who got frustrated because my internet was cut off. Yeah.
So you have a list of questions that you would want to ask, questions that Comcast hasn't answered, or other ISPs in general, who would fall under the same category of what they're doing.
Yeah. So I'm still kind of pulling it together, and there's probably a post I'm going to do with some of these in the near future. But questions like, are you favoring your TV distribution business over over your broadband business? If not, why do you insist on capping people completely? How did you come about this data cap? What data went into that data cap? How do you enforce it? Is it selective enforcement? We talked about this in passing a bit, or is it consistent? These are the sorts of things that you just kind of want to get a better sense of, and I've never seen any answer.
Do you think you're going to get an answer?
No, honestly.
What do you think it's going to take then? I mean,
what I want to see is, what I want to put out there are questions that consumers can ask, politicians can ask, the media can ask. I want to ask questions, put questions out there for people to ask that frankly don't have good answers, which will cause people to think and say, why don't they have good answers? I mean, you might get answers back, you might get words on a page, but they're going to be evasive. They're going to be fluffy. They're going to be easily called out. And what I would love is for when somebody gets the heck, if I get this thing posted, I'd love for you to take the questions and say, can you please give me answers to these?
Sure.
And then you can take a look at them, and I will step back. I mean, I have no idea what you'll think of them, but I can predict they will be probably evasive, unsatisfying. And my hope is that you can go and ask again and say, look, this is a non-answer, this is a non-answer. This one, hey, all right, there might be a little nugget here. Let's talk a bit about that, but the rest of this is a non-answer. I guarantee you that's how it's going to be. And the more that happens, the more I hope that people will kind of gain awareness, and the more then I hope the conversation will keep going forward, so that eventually Seattle will respond, and I can actually talk to somebody and say, so what is going on with this whole broadband thing in the city? I mean, this is a local thing for me. I have very few choices, and I have no choices except for Comcast above a certain speed rate of like 10 megabits. So how are we going to fix that? Is it working with Comcast? Is it them changing policy so nobody gets cut out of the ability to have Comcast? Is it, I don't know, citywide fiber? Maybe we need to figure out a way to have a city-run utility. And that's been done before, and you've seen some telcos get very unhappy about that. And,
of course.
And you see lawsuits, and eventually the city is able to go ahead and do it. Is that the right answer? I don't actually know. I mean, this is new to me. I'd like to have the conversation so that we can actually start thinking about it.
Well, I appreciate your time. I know it's about as precious as anybody's, but it sounds like your dogs need you back.
Yeah,
so,
it's probably the mailman come to kill us all. So
no worries. Well, thank you, Andre.
No worries. Thank you.
Watching
Appreciate
that
it.
story very closely.
Thank you.